In this video, we're going to talk about the way I set up Pro Tools. Let's say I just bought it, or I am working in a new studio where I don't know what settings they have. I always go to the preferences to check and make sure that I have the specific setup that's going to make me quicker. It's going to allow me to be more organized and to know where everything is. So once you go to preferences, the first thing I like to set is the plugins view to category and manufacturer. Usually the default is just category where it says EQ dynamics, all that good stuff, but having the manufacturer makes it easy because you can just go, oh yeah, I want that Waves plugin, I want that UAD plugin, and it's easier to find. Next is the default clip color coding, which I always set to track color because it always makes it much easier to organize groups of instruments. Say the drums are blue, the bass is black, the vocals yellow, the guitars are red. When you have everything color coded that way in your edit window and in your mix window, it makes it so that you can just breeze through a session. Trust me, it'll save you hours. Next is the operations window with the all-important backup set to 99. I don't know why they even set it to 10. And I set it to 3 minutes. 1 minute usually just makes Pro Tools go crazy and crash every 5 seconds, so that's why I give it at least 3. Next is the automatically create new playlist when I'm loop recording. Very useful setting. I'm a singer and I don't like to stop when I'm stacking vocals, so I just record a bunch and then I just go through them. Now this next setting called timeline insertion follows playback equals pressing the letter N as a quickie, which you'll see has to do with pressing stop, press and play, and changing how Pro Tools acts, whether it keeps going or it keeps playing from the spot you were before. Also, you have the fade-in curves there, which I usually like to just set to a certain specific fade before I make them. And then you also have the auto-name the markers, which is very useful to get you ready for a fast recording session. Next, in the mixing settings, we have the default EQ and the default dynamics. These are fantastic because they allow you to just do a quick plugin setup with just one click. And you'll see they'll show up basically, instead of looking for the plugin, they'll show up right away. My favorites are the 1073 EQ from UAD as well as the 1176 AE from UAD. They're usually a great start. I use them on almost every vocal. I always like to make sure that the plugin controls default to enabled is not set, because I have been in studios where they are, and sometimes when I do automation, I do it so quick for volume that I don't realize the setting is on, and then I touch the plugin and then it gets screwed up and I have to delete the automation. So it's always good to check this guy before a mixing session especially. Next, if we go to the processing settings, usually DigiDesign has a default of their own plugin for the time compression and expansion. You want a matrix style time adjustment or a crappy quality one, you can stick with that. I like to use Soundtoy Speed when it needs to be some pristine pitch or time adjustments. And then again, that's when I'm not using Melodyne, of course. If we go to the MIDI section, these two settings I usually leave at the default, unless I'm using an MPC or something to track into Pro Tools. If you want a video about that, let me know in the comments. Now, the last thing I like to check is in peripherals. Now that I'm using Pro Tools Control, I always like to have Yukon on. And this is where you do it. You just enable it right there. This next setting, you're actually going to be tweaking pretty much every day you use Pro Tools. And it's in Setup, Playback Engine, and it's what we call the buffer size. Why do we need to tweak it? I'll give you a few scenarios. Let's say you're recording a vocal, you started using Pro Tools, and you notice you start having a latency, whether all of a sudden or from the beginning. You hear yourself coming at you when you do percussive sounds, and it's like you have a slapback echo on yourself. Well, what you want to do is have this set to the lowest possible, which as a standard is usually 128 samples. If you go lower, you usually get a glitchy kind of noise. It'll start getting really grainy. It's just something with the hardware where usually, unless you have a very powerful computer, you can't go lower than that. For mixing, you want to go the highest, which is 1024 on some very powerful computers. You could even set it way beyond that. If you don't set this buffer size correctly for mixing, you'll notice you have a lot of stop playback. you'll get that error saying that there's not enough memory to process this mix, the buffer size is too low. It'll let you know, especially when you have a session loaded with plugins. Next, we have the I/O setup, which is basically a layout of the inputs and the outputs of your interface and or mixer, as well as the virtual tracks and signal flow going on within Pro Tools, which is what you use for your aux tracks and for routing among tracks. It's what takes something from point A to point B. If I'm moving studios with my interface, or if I'm working at a new studio, I always like to check the inputs to make sure it's clean and set up correctly. And it starts with asking whoever owns the studio or the system if they have an I/O setup, if you're having to route things to a console. And if you have an interface of your own, something simple like an Mbox and Apollo, you want to just delete everything and hit default. This is the easiest way to do it. That way you have a clean setup. That's exactly what the interface is asking for. I usually like to do it in the order of inputs, then outputs, then bus. That way when you do the buses, they will be laid out nicely and clean. I don't like to do buses, then outputs. It's usually Pro Tools messes up somehow. And the last thing you want to have is the audition paths there set to the correct main outs. And this concludes my Pro Tools preferences setup.